There was a man, and I will not give you his name yet, who had reached the specific condition that I am about to describe to you. He had spent years building toward a purpose. He had published, lectured, organized, planned. He had been given the most important assignment of his professional life by one of the most powerful men of his era. And in the autumn of a year that I will not yet name, he found himself without resources, without a plan, without the reasoning faculty he had relied upon through every previous difficulty. He could not look at himself in a mirror without contempt. He was, by his own reckoning, more helpless than any of the 25,000 people he had spent years studying as failures. He had become the thing he had spent his career attempting to prevent others from becoming. He had become the thing he had spent his career attempting to prevent others from becoming. Now here is the anomaly. Within 18 months of that specific condition, within 18 months of that specific paralysis, that specific humiliation, that specific point of apparent total collapse, this man would produce the work that went on to change the lives of millions of people across the world, not despite what had happened to him, because of it. And here is the principle that explains that outcome, the one that no teacher of success will emphasize, because it is not pleasant to hear at the moment when a man most needs to hear it. The turning point in the lives of those who succeed. The collapse is not the end, it is the door. What I am about to describe to you are the 5 specific things that happen inside the emotional collapse that precedes great wealth. Each of them has been verified in the documented history of men who actually built fortunes and lives of consequence. And each of them, if you are watching this because everything currently feels like it is falling apart, will help you to recognize where you are and what that means. Part 1, why the collapse always comes. Want to begin with the principle that most men, when they are inside the collapse, have never heard. And the reason they have never heard it is not that it is rare or obscure. It is that it is not comfortable to teach. And a comfortable teaching draws a larger and more agreeable audience than an honest one. Here is the principle. When infinite intelligence wants a great man or woman to do some needed service in the world, that person is first tested through some form of failure, not as punishment, not as random misfortune, as aspiration, with the same deliberateness that a capable executive tests his most trusted lieutenants before entrusting them with the responsibilities that matter most. No capable executive selects without testing the men upon whom his most important work will depend. Infinite intelligence operates by the same principle on a grander scale with a far longer view and without the slightest sentiment for the discomfort of the man being tested. I have studied this principle and its evidence in the histories of men who achieved great things for more than 50 years. And I can tell you with more certainty than I can claim for almost any other statement in this philosophy that I have never examined the record of a man of genuine consequence who was not first required to pass through some form of severe difficulty. Not occasionally, always, without exception. The poet Angela Morgan understood this more completely than most philosophers of her era. She described what nature does when she has decided to make something truly great of a man. She does not shelter him. She does not protect him from the weather. She drills him and thrills him. She hammers him and hurts him. She bends him, but she does not break. She makes him lonely so that only the highest messages will reach him. She disappoints him repeatedly with what appear to be the instruments of his destruction, which are in fact the instruments of his preparation. And when the crisis comes, when the shout goes up that must call the leader out there, he stands, not in spite of the furnace he has passed through because of it. I want to name a few of the men I have studied closely, not to lecture you about their historical achievements, but to make the pattern as plain as I am able. John Bunyan wrote what many consider the finest piece of English literature produced in his century after he had been confined in prison and severely punished for views that the authorities of his time found unacceptable. The prison did not interrupt his greatness. It produced it. Edison, The man who changed the material civilization of the world more thoroughly than any other individual in his era was a vagrant telegraph operator who failed innumerable times before the genius. Sleeping in his brain was finally, by the pressure of necessity, forced awake. Charles Dickens began his working life pasting labels on blacking pots. The tragedy of his first love penetrated his soul to depths he had not known he possessed. That penetration produced David Copperfield, then the succession of works that made the world richer for everyone. The wound did not diminish him, it discovered him. Helen Keller became deaf, blind, and without speech shortly after birth. She lived to write her name indelibly into the pages of history. Her entire life served as evidence that no one is ever defeated until defeat has been accepted as a reality. I could continue. The list is not short, but the pattern in every case is the same. The men and women who built the most are the men and women who were first required to carry the heaviest cross, not as a coincidence, as a law. Now, and here is the critical distinction that this entire teaching depends upon. There is an absolute difference between temporary defeat and permanent failure. They are not the same thing. Everything we talked about today only works if you use it. The free auto-suggestion sheet in the description gives you the exact steps. No guessing, no overwhelm. Download it now while it's fresh and start tonight. Watching is easy and start tonight. Watching is easy. Applying is what finally moves your life in the right direction. The choice is yours. Open quote. Open quote. They have never been the same thing. A man has never permanently failed until he himself accepts temporary defeat as permanent. Until that moment, until the man himself renders that verdict against himself, the verdict is not final. Every collapse is still, until that moment, simply a redirection, a firm hand reaching from the invisible arrangement of things, stopping a man on a road that would not have led where he needed to go, him with what I now recognize as great wisdom. I could not see it at the time, toward the road that... If you are watching this because everything feels like it is falling apart, you are not hearing this principle at a convenient time. You are hearing it at the right time. The convenient time would have required nothing of you. The right time requires everything. Part 2. The first thing, everything you trusted is taken. The first thing that happens inside the emotional collapse is the stripping. And in the most instructive cases, it is total, not partial, not the loss of one area of stability while others remain intact. The position goes, the income goes. The plan that the man had trusted, the plan that had organized his daily effort and given his future a comprehensible shape, goes with it. Everything that had given him his confidence in the direction of his life disappears within a period so compressed that he has no time to prepare for each successive loss before the next arrives. I will tell you about my own stripping, because I know no other account as precisely as I know this one, and because I believe there is more instruction in a man's honest account of his own failure than in any number of other men's stories told at a comfortable distance. By the autumn of 1923, I found myself stranded in Columbus, Ohio, without funds. I want to be precise about what that meant. It did not mean that my finances were difficult. It meant that for the first time in my adult life, I was unable to form a single practical plan for improving my condition. The resourcefulness that had served me through every previous difficulty had apparently departed entirely. I was not merely poor, I was without direction. And for a man who had devoted his working life to studying the causes of success and failure, who had lectured before business organizations and college and schools about the principles of personal achievement being without direction, was the specific humiliation that no financial difficulty could equal. I had come to this point through the accumulation of a particular series of events that I will not describe in full, except to say that each of them had at the time of its occurrence appeared to be the final piece of bad fortune, and each of them had then been followed by another. The stripping was not a single blow. It was a campaign. But I want to describe the pattern before this particular stripping because it is more instructive than the Columbus period taken alone. 7 times in my professional life, I arrived at what the uninformed would call failure. 7 distinct moments at which the thing I had built, the position, the enterprise, the plan, was removed by circumstances beyond my control or by circumstances that were directly the product of my own errors of judgment. At each of these 7 moments, I believed I had failed. I believed it with the full force of a man in the middle of the evidence. And at each of them, looking backward from the distance of years, I discovered the same truth. What had appeared to be failure was nothing more than a firm and ultimately kind, an unseen hand that stopped me in a course that would not have served my actual purpose and pointed me toward one that would. The lumber business that the 197 destroyed overnight. The business I had built with genuine competence and genuine effort, which the banker took over as calmly as if it had always been his. I would not recover what I lost there for several years, but the destruction of that business redirected me toward the study of law, which redirected me toward the work of organizing the philosophy that Carnegie had assigned to me. Without the loss, the redirection would not have occurred. Without the redirection, the purpose would not have been found. Close quote. Close quote. Here's what the stripping is always doing, regardless of how it presents itself. It removes what was in the way. The position that was stripped was not the foundation. It was sitting above the foundation, obscuring it. The enterprise that failed was not the real work. It was taking the time and the energy and the daily attention that the real work required. The stripping, as brutal as it is in the moment of its operation, is the removal of what would never have led to the thing the man was actually meant to build. And it forces the single question that the stripping is designed to produce. What do I actually have? What is the thing beneath all of this? The knowledge, the capacity, the understanding accumulated through the years of effort that cannot be stripped away. That question asked honestly in the silence of the stripped down life is the beginning of the actual foundation. Part 3. The second thing, the self-contempt. The second thing that happens inside the emotional collapse is the one most men find hardest to speak of and most reluctant to name. Not because it is private exactly, but because it carries a shame that most men feel they ought to have conquered by this point in their lives. It is the self-contempt, not ordinary discouragement, not the natural low spirits of a man who has had a run of bad fortune and expects things to improve. The specific, persistent, deeply humiliating conviction that every aspiration the man has ever held about himself has been exposed as pretension, that the person he believed himself to be was an elaborate performance for which the audience has now seen through the curtain, and that the gap between what he claimed to be and what he now appears to be is so wide that he cannot imagine standing in front of the world again with any honest claim on its respect. I know this condition precisely because I lived in it for more than a year. Every time I looked in a mirror during that period, I saw self-contempt on my face. I said things to the man in the mirror that are not repeatable in any company I would want to keep. I had spent years lecturing men and women about the 17 principles of personal achievement. I had published, I had organized, I had sat across from Carnegie and Ford and Edison and had learned from them principles by which men build great things. And I stood there in Columbus, Ohio, in the autumn of 1923, unable to apply a single one of those principles to my own condition. I had placed myself in the category of charlatans, men who offer others a remedy for failure which they themselves cannot apply. Now let me tell you what that self-contempt was actually telling me, because this is the instruction that the contempt never delivers itself, and that a man can only receive from outside it. The man who feels no shame of his condition has not cared enough about his purpose to be wounded by the distance between he is and where he intended to. B. Self-contempt in the specific form I am describing is the evidence of a man who has had a large vision of himself and has not yet abandoned it. It is painful precisely because the standard is still present. If the standard had been released, if the ambition had been surrendered, the contempt would have nothing to measure against and would dissolve. The man who is in this condition right now is not a man without purpose. He is a man whose purpose has been temporarily outpaced by circumstance. The contempt is not the disease. It is the evidence that the patient is still alive and still cares about the direction of his life. I want to give you two other men whose self-contempt preceded their greatest work. There was a man unnamed for the moment who met with severe misfortune and found himself confined in a prison cell in Columbus, Ohio. Everything about his condition was the opposite of the life he had imagined for himself. He was forced by the utter removal of every other option to become with a faculty he had never previously been required to use. He used his imagination not because conditions were favorable. They were as unfavorable as a man's conditions can be, but because the stripping had left him nothing but that faculty, and necessity pressed it into service. He discovered from within the walls of that cell that he was one of the greatest authors of his age. His name was O. Henry. There was another man who began his working life pasting labels on blacking pots for wages that would not have impressed a laborer. The tragedy of his first love left a wound in him that went deeper than anything his youth had prepared him for. In ordinary life, that wound produces, as I have observed, one of two things. It drives a man to drink, or it drives him to creation. This man was driven to creation. The wound became David Copperfield. Then the succession of works through which Charles Dickens made the world richer for everyone who could read. The self-contempt did not diminish these men. It was the evidence that they had not surrendered the standard. And when the other self finally arrived, as it always does, for the man who does not quit during the contempt, it found a man who had not abandoned what was supposed to be. Part 4, the third and fourth things, the paralysis and the walk that breaks it. He come now to the third thing, and then the fourth, and I want to place them together because they form a single sequence that I have observed in every instance where the collapse has been followed by the breakthrough. The third thing is the paralysis of the collapses of venison. Of Venice. Reasoning faculty, not weakness of will, not ordinary discouragement, the specific bewildering condition in which the tool the man has relied upon throughout his entire working life, his capacity to think, to plan, to reason his way from a problem to a solution, appears to have ceased functioning. He sits in the same position, and the same thoughts return in the same circles, producing no direction and no plan. He knows the principles. He may have taught others precisely what to do in this circumstance, but the instruction that was so clear when directed at another man's difficulty is entirely unavailable when directed at his own. I lived in this condition for over a year. Let me describe it precisely because it is important that the man who is in it should recognize it accurately. I was alive. I could move around, but I could not think of a single move by which I might continue toward the goal that Carnegie had set before me. The thoughts that came were circular. They always returned to the same starting point, the difficulty, without ever producing a plan for escaping it. I had begun to become indifferent, not only toward myself, but toward those around me, who had every right to expect more from a man they had sheltered than the silent, grouchy, increasingly still presence I had become. My reasoning faculty had almost been paralyzed. I say this without embarrassment because I know precisely what it was and what it was not. It was not the end. It was the third thing, the specific condition that precedes the fourth. The fourth thing is the walk. I want to describe this with complete precision because this is the turning point on which everything else depends. And I want you to have it as a practical instruction rather than merely as a story. On a night in the fall of 1927, more than a year after the worst of my difficulties, I left the house where I was staying and walked to the public school building hill above the town. I had reached a decision before I left. I would force my mind to think clearly before I returned, or I would not return at all. That night, I began to walk around the building. I must have made several hundred circuits of it before anything resembling organized thought formed. As I walked, I repeated one sentence aloud, not as a pleasant affirmation, not as a comfortable prayer, but a declaration that carried with it every particle of disgust and genuine determination that a man in my condition could produce. There is a way out, and I'm going to find it before I go back to the house. I must have said it 1,000 times, and I meant it every time. Then not gradually, not through the slow accumulation of small encouragements, flash of lightning out of a clear sky, an idea broke into my mind with a force that drove the blood through my veins. This is your testing time. You have been reduced to poverty and humiliated in order that you might be forced to discover your other self. I walked home. I sat at my typewriter. My children were watching through the window as our neighbor's children lit a Christmas tree next door. I recalled with a feeling of distress I had not known before that there would be no Christmas tree in our house that year. I placed the first sheet of paper in the machine and began to write. I did not stop until what needed to be written had been written. Now, let me give you the practical instruction that I drew from this experience and have drawn from every other account of this same sequence that I have examined. The paralysis of the reasoning faculty is not the end of thought. It is the suspension of the ordinary level of thought, the surface level, the level that has been insufficient for the difficulty being faced in order to make space for a deeper and more powerful level to operate. The circular thinking that characterizes this stage is not the subconscious working poorly. It is the subconscious working on a problem that is too large for the ordinary reasoning faculty to resolve, and doing so at a depth that the conscious mind cannot observe. The walk breaks the paralysis, not by solving the problem, but by giving the body a command while the mind is otherwise occupied with its repetition. Movement interrupts the circular pattern. Spoken repetition. One sentence spoken aloud with genuine determination, repeated as many times as the walk requires, occupies the conscious mind sufficiently to allow what is being prepared below the surface to finally reach the level. The sentence does not have to be eloquent. It has to be believed. It has to be meant. There is a way out, and I'm going to find it said until the flash comes, however many times that requires. Part 5. The fifth thing, the other self-awakenee have described 4 things that happen inside the emotional collapse. The stripping, the self-contempt, the paralysis, the walk that breaks the paralysis. Now I want to describe the 5th, and this is the one that makes the other 4 worthwhile. The 5th thing is the awakening of the other self. I want to explain precisely what I mean by this. I am not speaking of a mystical occurrence, documented, observable, repeatable event in the who has been pressed far enough. Within each human being, there reside 2 distinct governing forces. I have called one the fear entity. I called the other the faith entity. Under ordinary conditions, comfortable conditions that do not press a man to his limits, the fear entity dominates more than most men would care to admit. The voice that counsels excessive caution. It is the voice that translates ambition into anxiety. It is the internal critic that speaks most loudly in the quiet moments, suggesting that the thing the man is attempting is too large, too risky, too far beyond what circumstances have prepared him to reach. The faith entity, the other self, does not operate on the surface of ordinary conditions. It is available always, but it is not typically reached. The fear entity is too readily available to reasonable concern, too practiced in the art of dressing its counsel in the clothing of wisdom. There is a condition under which the fear entity's dominance becomes its own undoing. When the collapse is severe enough, when the stripping and the contempt and the paralysis have run their full course, and the man has been pressed to the exact point where the fear entity has nothing left to offer, the faith entity takes its place. Not gradually. In my experience, never gradually. Like lightning, you have been disappointed. You have undergone defeat. This is your testing time. Go back and complete the work. And I went without knowing yet where the money would come from, without knowing how the obstacles would resolve, with the specific, practical faith of a man who has been given a direction and intends to follow it. Regardless of what he can or cannot yet see, the man who emerges from the collapse is not the same man who entered it. He knows with a certainty that no comfortable period of his life could have produced, that he will not be broken by what comes next. Not because conditions will be kinder, but because he knows now from the inside that the thing which was designed to break him did not. Whatever comes next cannot be worse. And if it is worse, the man who survived the schoolhouse hill at 2 a.m, walking in circles and speaking his determination to no one, will survive that too. He knows that the ordinary reasoning faculty, while useful under ordinary conditions, is not his has met the other resource. He knows where to find it and what is required to reach it, and he will not forget. And he knows, and this perhaps is the most immediately useful thing of all, that every adversity carries within it the seed of an equivalent benefit, not a consolation, not a pleasant fiction for men who need encouragement, a documented law. I have discovered in more than 25 years of research into the causes of success and that with every experience of temporary defeat and every form of adversity, there comes the seed of an equivalent benefit. I know of no exception to this rule. The seed may not always be immediately visible, but it is there in one form or another in every without exception. Usually the seed consists of a form of knowledge, some lesson, some capacity, some understanding that couldn't have been acquired by any path other than through the defeat that contained it. Now let me give you the full sweep of this principle, not as my own account alone, but as the historical record confirms it. Lincoln died without knowing that his enemies had spent decades calling his failure had given foundation to the greatest nation on earth. Columbus died in chains, a prisoner, disgraced, condemned in the judgment of the world without knowing that what they called his failure was the discovery of a continent. Woodrow Wilson went to his grave too soon, believing himself to have failed. Time, the great miracle worker that rights all wrongs and turns failure into success, will place his name among the truly great. From Christ on down to Edison, the men who achieved most were the men who met with the most stubborn forms of temporary defeat before arriving. This is not coincidence. This is the plan by which infinite intelligence tests and prepares the men it intends for great service. Failure is nature's furnace, the place where the dross is burned from the metal, and what remains is the thing that can bear the weight of hard use. I want to close by speaking directly to the man or woman who has come to Avon this teaching, because everything currently feels like it is falling apart. You are not at the end. You are at the door. The collapse you are in has 5 things in it, and if you have recognized yourself in the things I have described tonight, you are somewhere within those 5. Name where you are. Not to dramatize your condition, to orient yourself to the map. If you are in the stripping, ask what cannot be stripped. The knowledge, the capacity, the understanding earned through the years of effort. Find the foundation beneath what was taken. If you are in the self-contempt, understand that you are feeling it because you have not abandoned your standard for yourself. The contempt is evidence of a vision that is still alive. Do not rush to end it with false reassurance. Let it remind you of what you still intend. If you are in the paralysis, do not make any permanent decision. Write that down and carry it. The reasoning faculty is temporarily suspended, not permanently destroyed. It has been insufficient for the problem you are facing, and something more adequate is being prepared. And if you are ready for the walk, go out tonight. Speak 1 sentence. Mean it entirely. Walk until the flash comes. The man you will be on the other side of this collapse is not weaker than the man who entered it. It is the man who was always inside you, weight conditions that ordinary comfort and ordinary success could never have produced. You have been appointed to a purpose. The collapse is the appointment being made real. Everything is falling apart so that what was always meant to can finally begin. Let me close by speaking directly to every man or woman who found this teaching, because everything currently feels like it is falling apart. You are not at the end. You are at the door. And the door, as I have described, contains 6 things, not 5. The stripping removes the false foundation and exposes the real one. Ask what cannot be taken. The self-contempt is evidence that you have not abandoned your standard. It is the fuel. Do not rush to end it with consolation. Let it remind you of what you still intend to be. The paralysis is the suspension of the ordinary level of thought, not its permanent end. The ordinary has been insufficient for the difficulty you face, and something more adequate is being prepared below the surface. The walk breaks the paralysis. Get up, move. Speak 1 sentence with every particle of genuine determination you possess. Walk until the flash comes. When the flash comes, do not rest. Write the plan within 24 hours, specific, dated, signed. Read in the morning and the night with feeling from that day forward. And when you are on the other side, guard the territory the other self has won. Do not allow the fear entity, which has merely been dethroned and not destroyed, to reclaim what was taken from it at such great cost to you. The daily practice is not a pleasant addition to the life of a man who has been through the collapse. It is the specific instrument by which he ensures that what the collapse produced is made permanent. Everything is falling apart so that what was always meant to be built can finally begin. And this time, with the plan written and the practice daily and the door to the other self standing open, it will not merely begin, it will be completed. Sheet in the description. It's based on exactly what we're covering here. Actually apply what you have here. Don't just listen. So pause this, get the sheet now, and watch your life finally start moving in the right direction.